Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, what if I told you that the secret to escaping poverty isn't just about electing the right politicians, but, well, it literally comes down to the dirt beneath your feet? Today, we're digging into the hidden ecological bedrock that actually dictates economic potential. We'll be drawing on a truly groundbreaking econometric analysis by researchers Richard Palmer Jones and Kunal Sen. Their work basically forces us to look past the political maps we're all so used to and instead look down at the ground to figure out why some regions thrive while others get trapped in poverty.
So, to make sense of this geographical puzzle, we've got to challenge a really common assumption. For decades, everyone just assumed that state level political policies and government spending were the main drivers of rural poverty reduction, right? We usually give local politicians all the credit or all the blame for the economy. But we have to ask ourselves, does political geography actually match up with economic reality? Like, if we map out poverty, does it stop neatly at a state border?
If you map out India's poverty reduction between 1983 and 1994, a huge anomaly jumps right out. During this era, state policies were getting basically universal credit for economic improvements. But the actual rate of poverty decline varied wildly depending on the geographic region. We're talking about deep, stubborn concentrations of poverty in eastern and central India that completely ignored state lines. It's like the poverty lines just drew themselves right over the political ones. To put some numbers to this, on paper, India hitting a national rural poverty average of 39.3% in 1993 sounds like a massive win. But you know how averages work? They hide the extremes. That overall number is super deceptive. Palmer Jones and Sen realized that deep in eastern and central India, poverty was incredibly stubborn. It just wasn't budging at the same rate as the rest of the country. This really exposes the illusion of state borders. Take a single state, like Maharashtra. If state policy was the ultimate fix, poverty levels would be pretty uniform across the whole state. Instead, you've got the coastal region sitting at around 19% poverty, while the inland northern region is at a staggering 48%, almost 50%. You see the exact same thing in Andhra Pradesh. When you have rural poverty swinging by nearly 30 percentage points inside the exact same state, we can safely say state policy is absolutely failing as our main explanation. Something else is pulling the strings. So, what's actually going on? Well, we basically have to throw out the political map. We need to peel back those arbitrary administrative borders, which, let's face it, are just lines drawn on paper, down to localized regions, and finally look at the true physical reality of the land. It turns out India can actually be divided into 19 distinct agroecological zones, or AEZs. These are completely defined by bioclimate, growing periods, and the inherent soilscape. This is the unchangeable physical reality of the Earth. And honestly, here is where so many past studies got it completely backwards. They treated policy-driven infrastructure, stuff like irrigation networks, rural roads, and electricity, as the starting line. But policy is really just responding to the ecological hand it was dealt. You wouldn't build a massive, expensive canal network where the bedrock makes it completely impossible, right? The infrastructure is just an enabler. The bedrock itself is the ultimate unchangeable decider. So, if we want to figure out how poverty actually drops at the end of the day, we have to trace the cause and effect all the way backwards. You trace poverty reduction back to agricultural growth, then back to irrigation feasibility, all the way to the very first spark, ecological luck. It literally comes down to the geographic lottery. It's helpful to think of these as 4 dominoes that have to fall in a very specific order. First, your ecological luck dictates your access to water. Second, that water determines if irrigation is even feasible. Third, that irrigation paves the way for agricultural growth, meaning high-yield seeds and multiple harvests. And finally, that growth brings down poverty. I mean, fancy tractors and chemical fertilizers are entirely useless if that very first domino of water doesn't fall. To give you an idea of how powerful this is, the researchers found something massive. Even when you control for deeply entrenched social barriers, things like population density, literacy rates, and landlessness, just a 1% increase in agricultural growth independently accounts for nearly 0.5% decrease in poverty. It's a real game changer. But it begs the million-dollar question: where does that agricultural growth actually come from in the first place? Well, the answer is that geographic lottery. You can't just wish a canal network into existence out of thin air. To get the kind of irrigation and accessible groundwater that makes modern farming work, you need a lucky bioclimate with the right temperatures, and you need a great soilscape. Think deep, fertile soil instead of shallow, rocky ground. Get this,
A staggering 56% of the spatial variation in India's irrigation infrastructure is explained purely by which of those 19 agroecological zones a district happens to sit in.
Let's put two extremes side by side to really see this in action. Take Zone 4, the Northern Plains, and compare it to Zone 7, the Deccan Plateau. Zone 4 is blessed with flat land and incredibly fertile soils, making irrigation a total breeze. The result over time? Rapid agricultural growth and massive drops in poverty. Now, shift over to Zone 7. It's stuck with shallow black soils and really rocky, tough terrain. Irrigation there is severely limited, which means stagnant farm productivity and really stubborn poverty. It's not that Zone 7 just has bad policies, it has fundamentally constrained bedrock. And that brings us to a pretty harsh reality, something called the ecological ceiling. State money and good policy act like an accelerator, right? They push a region up its growth curve. But the bedrock dictates exactly how high that ceiling actually goes. An arid, rocky region just fundamentally has a lower maximum limit for farming than a lush river plain, and that holds true no matter how many billions of dollars a local government throws at the problem. So what happens when policymakers just ignore this? Well, usually try to force a green revolution in dry, arid zones where it honestly just doesn't belong. Because the earth there is naturally constrained, pumping in massive, inefficient irrigation subsidies gives you incredibly low returns. You hit that low ecological ceiling super fast, and what you're left with is sustained poverty. It's literally fighting a losing battle against geography. Instead of fighting the dirt, we need a total paradigm shift. If a region's soil is just inherently limited, we've got to stop praying for an agricultural miracle and redirect our efforts. We need an ecologically aligned strategy. That means shifting funds toward direct poverty interventions, things like rural public works programs, and really stimulating non-farm economic growth in places where crops just aren't going to thrive.
The big takeaway here is that we simply cannot engineer our way out of ecological bedrock. Recognizing our physical, structural limits is actually the very first, most crucial step to overcoming them. Because if we misdiagnose the root cause of regional poverty as just some failure of political will, we're just going to keep prescribing the exact wrong medicine. I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. If our economic potential is really so heavily dictated by the literal dirt beneath our feet, how do we rewrite our national policies to actually help the people living in those truly unlucky geographic zones? Like, how do we build a fair, equitable future when the starting line was drawn millions of years ago by a geographic lottery? It's a lot to think about. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive. I really hope it totally changes the way you look at the map.